weren't meant to hear this, not from me, not from anyone still breathing. It's not a story. Stories end. This doesn't. It's a staircase, and once you take the first step, the ground you knew will never feel solid again. 30 children went into the Merrow Municipal Museum. 24 came out. The official record stops there. But the truth, the real truth, begins 3 steps deeper than the police ever looked. I have walked those steps. I've seen what waits at the bottom. And I am telling you now, if you keep listening, your life will split into before and after. It was a Wednesday, calm skies. Nothing unusual. A class trip like hundreds before. The building rose like an obedient relic. The kind of place you assume has been there since your grandparents' grandparents, because no one remembers it being built. The children filed in under the grand stone arch, their sneakers slapping the marble like polite applause. The teacher, Mrs. Calder, had the schedule memorized. Bones, Victorians, war memorial, packed lunches, home. But the museum had its own schedule, and it had been waiting. A boy, Jamie Sloan, age 9, stopped in front of the taxidermy wolf. He pointed past it. Narrow hallway, door with black hinges, a place not on any map, a place the docents never mention. He said he saw other children go through it. The guide's name tag read Shepherd. His gloves were white, perfectly fitted. His voice, smooth enough to cut glass, said, "There is no basement in this museum." By the end of the tour, 7 children were missing. No alarms, no open exits. Camera feeds blank as though they'd blinked. And then, the change. The colonial kitchen exhibit. A butter churn moved. A ladle gone. And where a stone wall had been behind the fireplace, a stairwell, soot black and breathing cold air like a sleeping lung. The dogs refused to go down. They didn't bark. They did. Want whine. They lay down in front of the opening, heads between their paws, as though the air itself commanded them to submit. The museum denied everything. No basement, never was. But a week later, a janitor, 28 years on the job, left a voicemail with the county archives. His voice was shaking. He said, "I don't know how, but the kids opened it. The stairwell, the hearth door. I've been down there before. The walls have names carved into them. Names of children who went missing, years before they were even born." That voicemail cut off mid-breath. Police went to his house. Empty, no struggle, but scratched into the back of his bedroom mirror in perfect childlike handwriting were 3 words. "We followed the bell." That phrase is older than the museum, older than the building it replaced, older than the city. I've seen it in the oldest records they haven't burned yet. I've heard it whispered by people who won't tell you their names, and I followed it myself. I'm telling you this now because men like you, men who understand that control is never kind, deserve to know how deep the control goes. You think you've seen manipulation in politics, in religion, in money. That's surface-level theater. What the Merrow Museum hides is something older than empires and quieter than graves. It's not about taking the children, it's about using them. The stairwell, the black spiral. It isn't made to lead down. It's made to strip. Memory, time, will, step by step until there's nothing left but the shape of obedience, and the children who walk it don't always come back the same. You've heard whispers of mind control, of indoctrination programs buried inside government experiments. This isn't like that. This is the root they grew from, the original method. Physical architecture designed to overwrite human identity, one turn at a time. The walls themselves breathe rhythm. Every 7th step hums, every 12th step chills the bones, every 24th step erases a name you once knew. That's why no camera catches it. The act of recording forgets itself, and the man with the gloves, Shepherd, he's not a man who ages. I've seen photographs from 1912, 1954, 2003, same face, same build, always by the stairs, always in gloves, always near the moment someone goes missing. Do you think that's just a guide, a caretaker? No. Shepherd is a gatekeeper, a warden. The last smiling face you see before you become something that isn't yours anymore. And I can tell you this because I've stood where Jamie stood, looking into that dark throat of stone. I didn't go down, not all the way, but I went far enough to hear the bells. They don't ring like church bells. They don't ring like school bells. They ring like something calling in. I have one question for you before we go further. How badly do you want to know what's at the bottom? Because after this, you don't get to unknow it. Every lie worth believing is built on a foundation of truth. That's why the Merrow Museum has stood untouchable for more than 100 years. Because half of what you see is genuine. The bones are real. The artifacts are authentic. The staff you meet are just regular people. But the truth that matters, the one that owns the building, is buried under marble and respectability, under the centuries-old lie that there is no basement. You've seen what a basement is. 4 walls, some pipes, maybe a furnace. The thing under the Merrow Museum isn't that. It's older than the building above it, and it was here before Merrow was a city at all. The official history says the museum was built in 1894 on the site of a burned-out textile mill. The real records, the ones hidden in county archives, say different. The site was already home to a deep circular excavation. The workers who dug it didn't report to city planners. They answered to a private trust, the name of which appears nowhere in modern registries. The excavation wasn't filled. It wasn't bricked over. It was built around. And that spiral, it didn't lead to storage rooms or foundations. It led somewhere that kept asking for more steps. The man overseeing the work in 1894 was photographed once. Tall, lean, hands in gloves, hat brim low over his face. No name given. The foreman's diary describes him as the shepherd, a man who never dirtied his gloves, even in the deep. The diary stops abruptly. The last entry, 2 more turns left. The sound is clearer now. That's the kind of history they hide in climate-controlled vaults, the kind no reporter gets near. And I've seen enough of it to understand something most people can't stomach. Institutions don't just cover things up, they feed them. Why? Because control isn't about ruling from above, it's about shaping from below. What happens in that spiral doesn't just consume children, it produces something in return. Ask yourself why the disappearances always come in numbers that seem deliberate. 31, then 32. Ask why the names of the missing show up carved in walls years before they're born. Ask why the shepherd's face hasn't changed in a century. They don't take randomly, they take by pattern. The pattern is the point. The first whispers of that pattern came in 1909 from a woman named Agnes Bellwright, headmistress of an orphanage. She took her students to the museum, 31 children in all. They saw the hearth, they heard the bells, and they didn't come back. Her letter to the school board, never opened until a century later, said she followed them down the spiral. 49 turns before the air thinned, singing, backwards, steps that forgot her when she tried to go back up. Her last line, there were more than 31 before, there will be more again. The museum's board still meets under that warning. I know because one of them tried to sell the minutes to a private collector. That collector is in the ground now, not buried, ground. And it's here that you need to understand the psychology at work. The staircase isn't just a path, it's a tool. It's designed to erode the will. Every turn makes you forget the turn before. That means by the time you've gone far enough to realize you're lost, you've already forgotten the way out. That's how control systems work in the open world too. Political theater, cultural rewrites. They're spiral staircases you can't see, and every news cycle is another step. The museum is just the purest form of it, the original form. But the Merrow spiral does something worse. It doesn't just strip memory, it adds something in its place. Those who return, the few who ever do, are not the same. They flinch at bells, they avoid mirrors, they sleep in corners facing the door, and some of them smile at times when nothing's funny. The first recorded shepherd incident happened in 1912. A photographer caught him standing at the bottom of the East Wing staircase during the museum's expansion ceremony. Children in the frame are all looking at him, not at the camera. A note in the archives describes what happened moments later. The youngest child in the photo stepped forward, reached out to touch his glove, and vanished in full view of the crowd. The police report says the child wandered off in confusion, but every witness claimed the boy was there one blink, gone the next, and Shepherd, he was still smiling. That's why I'm telling you now. If you think you can hear the bells without answering them, you're wrong. They don't just call, they choose. And if you're chosen, the only real question is how far down you're willing to go before you stop being you. The first rule is this: you don't find the spiral. The spiral finds you. You could walk the Merrow Museum 1,000 times and never see the hearth door. You could stand in the colonial kitchen exhibit for hours, staring straight at the wall where it should be, and it will be nothing but stone, until one day, it isn't. That day for me was quiet. I'd been in the museum dozens of times before, researching, digging through their surface-level archives, memorizing floor plans. But this time the light in the kitchen seemed a fraction dimmer. The fireplace stood cold, ash undisturbed, but the wall behind it was wrong. The stone seemed newer, sharper, as if the mortar had been laid yesterday. I don't remember stepping closer, but I was there, hand on the wall. And it wasn't cold. It was warm. The sound came next, faint, metallic. Not a chime, not a church bell, more like iron striking bone. The rhythm was slow, patient. When the wall shifted, it didn't swing like a door, it folded. Stones collapsing into themselves, revealing a hole that breathed cold into my face. There it was, the spiral. The steps weren't marble like the museum's main halls. They were hewn from black stone, each tread worn into a subtle dip by uncountable feet. The curve bent hard to the right, disappearing after 3 steps. No railing, no light, just a center column of the same black stone, swallowing the staircase into its coil. And here's where it gets strange. The air didn't smell like dust or damp. It smelled like copper. I took the first step. The sound changed immediately, not louder, but closer, as if it had been waiting for my weight to trigger it. Second step. A whisper brushed my ear. No words, just the sensation of breath. Third step. The temperature dropped sharply. My skin prickled, not from cold, but from something that felt like static electricity crawling under it. By the 7th step, my thoughts weren't in order, not disordered like confusion, more like someone had swapped them. Memories from years ago surfaced in the wrong sequence. I remembered my grandmother's funeral before I remembered my own name. That's when I realized. This spiral was designed. Every step was measured, not just in height and width, but in psychological effect. The distance between them was constant enough to trick your muscles into a rhythm the bells matched perfectly. You start syncing to them without realizing it, and once you sync, you stop thinking about going back. By the 12th step, I had to touch the wall. It pulsed under my hand, not like a heart, but like something breathing slow and deep. My fingertips came away damp, not with water, with something thicker. Every 24th step, there was a deeper hum, low enough to feel in your bones. That hum erased something. I don't remember what. The curve of the staircase was too tight for perspective. You never see more than a few steps ahead. That makes you lean forward, craning for the next turn. You stop noticing how far you've gone. Somewhere around the 40th step, I started hearing feet behind me, not in sync with mine. I didn't look back. I don't know why. Maybe because some part of me already knew there would be nothing to see, or maybe because the sound didn't want me to. At the 49th step, the bells stopped. That's when I saw it. A name carved into the wall in shallow, jagged strokes. Not aged, not eroded, fresh. It was my name. The date under it was next year, and before I could process that, a gloved hand rested lightly on my shoulder. The glove was warm, not just body heat warm, but the kind of warmth you feel when you've been standing too close to a fire for too long. The heat that sinks into you and stays. I didn't turn right away, maybe because I already knew what I'd see. When I finally did, Shepard was closer than comfort allows. No more than 2 steps away, leaning in just enough for the brim of his hat to shadow his face. Even here, in the absence of light, the gloves caught what little glow there was. They were spotless, not leather, not fabric. Something smoother, something without seams. "Keep walking," he said. The voice was low, unhurried, and it didn't echo, which was strange because everything else in the spiral did. I asked him how far it went. He smiled. "Farther than you." He didn't touch me again, but his presence was a hand on my back, a push that wasn't physical. I walked. As we moved, he began reciting something under his breath, a list, not names, not words, just syllables arranged in a rhythm I couldn't place. Every few steps, he would stop speaking and listen, as if waiting for a reply only he could hear. When the bells started again, softer this time, he finally spoke to me directly. "You will follow 3 rules." His tone didn't leave room for negotiation. Rule 1, do not count the steps. He must have seen the confusion on my face because he explained in that same calm tone, "Every step you count will not exist for you when you go back. If you count too many, you will not have enough to return." Rule 2. Do not touch the center column. He didn't explain this one, but I didn't need him to. Even walking past it, I could feel something radiating from that black stone. Not heat, not cold, but a pressure, as if it wanted to push into my skin and stay there. Rule 3. When you hear your own voice, keep moving. I asked what would happen if I didn't. His smile didn't change, but the air seemed to tighten. "You'll give it an opening." The deeper we went, the more the spiral changed. The steps were still stone, but the walls were no longer smooth. They were carved with shallow grooves, lines spiraling downward like veins. Every so often, the grooves would widen into symbols I didn't recognize. Some looked almost like faces. At one turn, I swore I saw the grooves shift, just slightly, as if the stone flexed under its own will. Shepard noticed my glance but said nothing. Then, without warning, he stopped. We were at a landing, the first flat surface since the hearth door. In the center was a small brass bell on a stand. Its surface was blackened with age, but when Shepard touched it, it rang as if brand new. The sound didn't fade, it stretched. I could still hear it after a full minute, as if the tone was circling somewhere far below. "That's the call," he said. "It knows you now." I asked what it was. "You'll see, or you won't." He motioned for me to keep moving. As we descended again, I realized something that froze me mid-step. I couldn't remember where the last landing had been. I couldn't even picture the hearth door anymore. The staircase wasn't just taking me down, it was taking pieces of the way back. Shepard glanced over his shoulder. "Now you understand Rule 1. And then I heard it. My voice, not echoing my words, not mimicking. It was speaking in my tone, my pitch, but saying things I've never said, things I would never say. It was close, too close. Shepard didn't slow down. "Keep walking," he said. "It's not for you yet." The sound of my voice faded, but not because it stopped speaking. It just fell behind, like something pacing us on the other side of a wall. The steps widened gradually, enough that I didn't notice until the curve broke, the spiral finally opening into a chamber. I expected a room. What I got was a hollow too vast for the light I had to measure. The air was still copper-scented, but thicker now, humid in a way that felt like breath. The walls weren't stone anymore. They were something darker, softer looking, yet somehow more permanent. They didn't reflect light. They drank it. And at the center, the bells, not one, not 10, hundreds, suspended from lines that vanished upward into shadow. Different sizes, different metals, some rusted to the point of ruin, others gleaming like they'd been polished an hour ago. They weren't swaying, but they rang, each at a slightly different pitch. No rhythm, yet no chaos either. Every note felt placed, deliberate. Shepard stepped forward into the tangle of hanging bells without hesitation. He moved between them like someone weaving through a familiar garden path, never brushing one with his shoulder. "Don't touch them," he said. "They don't like to be touched." I asked him why there were so many. "They're not for you," he said. "They're for what's listening." He pointed to the far side of the chamber, where the darkness was thicker. I couldn't see an opening, but I could feel a draft. Slow, rhythmic, as if something on the other side were breathing in time with me. The bells began to respond to it. The deeper the breath, the lower the tone. When the air drew back toward the unseen opening, the higher bells trembled. The sound was hypnotic, not beautiful, but inevitable. Like the ticking of a clock you can't unhear. I tried to look past the bells into the dark, but the longer I stared, the more I felt like I was being stared through. Not watched. Read. "She's deciding," Shepard said. I didn't ask who she was. I had the sinking feeling that speaking her name, if I even knew it, would invite her closer. A small bell near my head rang without moving. The note was sharp, thin enough to feel like it was slicing between my thoughts. Shepard nodded toward it. "That one's yours now." The phrase didn't make sense, but I understood its weight. Somewhere in the impossible geometry of this place, something now had my frequency, my note, fixed in its memory. "Once you have a bell," Shepard said, You can't leave until it's done ringing. I asked how long that would take. He smiled. Longer than you. He stepped toward the far side of the chamber. I followed, ducking through the hanging forest of metal, careful not to brush them. Each one hummed faintly as I passed, like they knew I was here. The draft from the darkness grew colder, the breath deeper. And then, a shape moved. Not forward, not sideways. It shifted, like it was rearranging itself in a way bones and skin shouldn't allow. I couldn't see the whole of it, only pieces. Curves where no curve should be, joints bending away from themselves. Shepard didn't flinch. "She's awake now," he said. "We'll go deeper." Before I could argue, the bells all rang at once. The sound wasn't deafening, it was worse. It was inside me, vibrating in my teeth, my spine, my eyes, and in that moment I understood the third rule. If you stop walking here, you'll never move again. Leaving the chamber of bells was like stepping out of one heartbeat and into another. The air changed. Colder, yes, but also heavier, as if the atmosphere had more weight than it should. We entered a passage that didn't spiral. It sloped, smooth and steady, the walls narrowing until they pressed close enough that the sound of my own steps bounced back at me in little echoes. Here the walls were no longer stone. They looked like lacquered wood at first glance, dark and polished, but when Shepard's light skimmed over them, I saw the surface twitch. Not fast, not obvious, but enough that you couldn't tell yourself it was imagination. I reached out without thinking. Reflex, the human urge to prove something's real by touch. And Shepard's hand shot out. The glove hit my wrist, not hard, but with enough pressure to freeze me mid-movement. "Don't," he said. His voice didn't carry anger, but it was the first time I'd heard it hold urgency. I asked why. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned in and held the light to the wall. Up close, the polished surface had a grain, fine ridges that rippled ever so slightly, like the skin of something sleeping. Between those ridges, fine cracks, not random. Patterns, the kind of patterns you'd see in fingerprints. "Everything down here remembers," Shepard said. "If it knows your skin, it can call you back." The gloves, I realized, weren't for warmth. They were for secrecy. "What happens if it calls me back?" I asked. "You'll come," he said simply, "even if you're not alive anymore." We moved on. The further we walked, the more the walls leaned inward. At times, I had to turn sideways to slip through. I tried not to think about what would happen if the movement in the walls stopped pretending to be subtle. Eventually, the passage opened again, but not into a room, into a ledge. We were standing at the rim of a drop so deep the light couldn't touch bottom. The slope of the floor ended abruptly, stone cut perfectly to the edge. Across the chasm, maybe 30 feet away, another ledge, no visible bridge. Shepard didn't hesitate. He walked along the rim to a section where the walls were close again, and then he put his hand on the surface. The wall rippled under the glove and something rippled back. A section of the darkness below shifted upward, folding out into a narrow walkway that hadn't existed a second ago. It looked solid, but it pulsed faintly under its own weight, like muscle. "You don't step on this without gloves," Shepard said. "You'd never get your feet back." I watched him walk across first, each step slow, deliberate. The walkway moved subtly under him, as if adjusting to his balance. When it was my turn, I forced my breathing into even rhythm and stepped onto the living bridge. It gave slightly, like walking on the stretched hide of a drum. Halfway across, the bells rang again, far above, far behind. But the sound didn't stay there. It traveled down through the walls, into the walkway, and into my legs. I nearly stumbled. Shepard didn't turn, but I heard him say, "It's not calling you yet. Keep moving." By the time we reached the other side, my calves were trembling, not from the walk, but from the vibration still clinging to my bones. I looked back once. The bridge was gone. We were in, and whatever this next space was, I could already hear movement inside it. The passage ahead widened just enough for us to walk side by side again, though Shepard still took the lead. He didn't speak, didn't even glance back. I think it was the first time I'd seen him look cautious. The movement I'd heard earlier was still there, faint, steady, with the strange syncopation of something that doesn't care if you're listening. Too slow for footsteps, too deliberate for wind. We rounded a shallow bend and the light finally touched it. At first I thought it was a sculpture. A human figure hunched low, draped in some heavy, sagging cloth. Its head was bowed, the shape of its skull too sharp in some places, too smooth in others. But then it inhaled. It wasn't a gasp or a sigh or anything human. It was a pull, a deep, soundless drag of air that made the walls twitch in unison. Shepard stopped so suddenly that I nearly walked into him. "Don't speak," he said. The thing lifted its head. No eyes, no mouth. Just a smooth plane where features should have been, as if it had been carved before faces were invented. But I felt it register me all the same. I don't know if seeing is the right word. It was recognizing. Slowly it unfolded itself to stand. The cloth, if it was cloth, slipped down its sides and pooled on the floor. Underneath, its limbs were wrong in the same way the shape in the bell chamber had been wrong, the kind of wrong that doesn't happen by accident. It took one step forward. The sound it made wasn't from its feet. It came from inside the walls, like it was walking on the structure of the place itself. I glanced at Shepard, expecting some kind of command or explanation. Instead, he pulled off one glove. The skin of his hand was pale, almost grey, marked with spirals of faint, raised scar tissue that wound around each finger. He held that hand out toward the faceless thing, not like an offering, more like a sign. It stopped, tilted its head in a slow, alien arc. Shepard didn't move, didn't lower his hand. The thing mirrored him, raising its own limb, thinner, longer, and placing it against the wall. The surface rippled where it touched, and then the thing stepped into the wall. Not like passing through water, not like melting. It simply wasn't there anymore. The wall settled, the air eased. Shepard put the glove back on and started walking again. Only then did he speak. "That wasn't for you," he said. I asked what it was. His answer was short. "A collector." The word felt heavier than it should, like the kind of title you only get after doing the same thing for a very, very long time. We kept moving, but from then on, every time the walls shifted, I found myself wondering, was it the place breathing, or was it just another collector passing close enough to smell my skin? The passage narrowed again, not in the way the lacquered walls had squeezed us. This was different. Here the stone felt older, rougher, as though whatever had carved it had cared more about speed than shape. Shepard slowed his pace, not out of hesitation but because the floor had started to slope upward, the incline so gradual you'd miss it if you weren't watching your steps. That's when I saw it. At first it looked like a heap of cloth in the corner where the wall bulged, the kind of discard you'd expect in an abandoned stairwell, a blanket maybe, but the closer we got, the clearer the details became. It was a coat, a man's coat, heavy wool, old cut, the sort of thing you'd see in photographs from half a century ago. It was half-buttoned, one sleeve turned inside out as though whoever wore it had been pulled out of it mid-motion. Shepard didn't stop, but I did. The fabric was brittle with age, but the floor beneath it was wrong. The dust and grit that coated the rest of the passage stopped here in a clean arc, as if the coat had fallen yesterday. I crouched, my hand hovered above the fabric. I remembered the wall, remembered his warning, and I didn't touch. The inside of the sleeve wasn't empty. There was an arm, not bone, not flesh, not anymore. The skin was a dull, greyish white, drawn so tight over the shape beneath it that every tendon and vein stood out like ropes. The fingers were curled inward, nails split and darkened, and there, at the wrist, the faint spiral scars I had seen on Shepard's ungloved hand. I looked back at him. His eyes flicked to the coat, then back to the passage ahead. He didn't stop walking. "You knew him," I said. "I knew of him," Shepard corrected. He thought he understood the rules, thought they were his to change. I stood and followed, my stomach tight. What happened to him? We reached a point where the ceiling lowered, and he ducked to pass through. "He touched what remembered him," Shepard said, "and it didn't forget." I glanced back once, and for a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw the fingers in that ruined sleeve twitch. The incline leveled out after the coat, but the texture of the stone didn't return to the neat-cut precision of the earlier corridors. Here it looked grown, not carved, not assembled, grown. Veins of darker rock twisted along the walls, converging and diverging like a petrified circulatory system. The floor was uneven too, patches of smooth surface interrupted by rough, almost crystalline bulges that glittered faintly in Shepard's light. We walked for a long while without speaking. It wasn't silence, not really. There was a hum here, low and constant, vibrating faintly through the soles of my boots. If I'd been alone, I might have mistaken it for my own pulse echoing in my ears. But Shepard's unhurried pace told me this was a sound he expected. The hum deepened as we went, the air thickening with each step until breathing felt like drinking. Finally, the corridor widened. The change was abrupt. No slow transition this time. One moment we were in a stone artery, the next we stood on the lip of an enormous cavern that stretched beyond the reach of our light. I'd thought the bell chamber was vast, but this was on another scale entirely. The air was colder here, yet not lifeless. There was movement, subtle currents that carried scents I couldn't name. Mineral sharpness, yes, but underneath it something organic, faint and unsettlingly familiar. Shepard didn't step forward immediately. He stood at the edge, lamp raised, scanning the darkness as though expecting an answer. I took a step closer, peering into the cavern. That's when I saw it. Not on the far wall, but beneath our feet. We weren't standing on solid ground. The ledge we occupied jutted out over an expanse of something that was almost stone but moved with the slow, shifting rhythm of breath. It took my mind a moment to make sense of it. The floor of the cavern was a single, massive surface. Smoot. Beige and pale, with faint ridges like the whorls of a fingerprint spiraling out from a central depression far below. And in that depression, something glimmered. It wasn't a reflection. The light came from within, pulsing slowly, as though the source were wrapped in layers that let it bleed through. Shepard finally spoke. "This is where it starts," he said. I asked what it was. He didn't answer, not directly. "The museum's bones are tied to this place. The halls above, the collections, the rooms that appear and vanish, all of it exists because this is here." I stared at the great breathing surface. "What is it?" He shook his head, but not like he didn't know. More like the name wasn't something I was allowed to hear. Instead, he said, "Before the ground above had a name, before the first stone was cut or story told, this lay in the dark. The first men who came here thought it was a god. The ones after thought it was a wound. They were both right." I couldn't tell if he meant wound as in injury or wound as in spiral. Either way, the image lodged in my mind and refused to leave. We moved along the ledge, following its curve. The hum grew louder the nearer we came to the center, though the path never descended. It was as if we were walking the rim of a vast bowl, looking down into the heart of something that didn't belong in any human map of the world. Every so often, Shepard would stop, tilt his head and wait. I'd listen too, straining to catch whatever signal he heard, but all I could make out was the endless drone of the place's breath and the occasional shifting creak of that enormous surface below. At one point, I spotted something on the far wall. Vertical shapes like pillars, though they didn't reach the cavern floor. They hung suspended, tapering at both ends, swaying slightly as if stirred by a current. I was about to point them out when one of them opened. Not completely, just enough for a seam to widen and then close again. Inside, for an instant, something pale moved. Shepard didn't look, or maybe he already knew. We came to a halt at a point where the ledge widened into a natural platform. From here we could see more of the central depression. The light within it was clearer now, cycling between pale white and deep amber, the change so slow you could only notice it by looking away and then back again. Shepard crouched, setting his lamp down. His gloved hand pressed to the stone at his feet. For a moment he stayed like that, still, listening. Then he reached into his coat and withdrew something small and dark. It took me a second to realize what it was. A tooth, not human. Too long, too curved, the surface ridged with tiny grooves like the veins in a leaf. He set it gently on the stone. At first, nothing happened. Then the ground beneath it rippled, the motion radiating outward like a drop of water in a pond. The ripple traveled toward the center of the cavern, and I swear the pulse of the light there shifted in response. Not faster, but aware. "She remembers," Shepard murmured. "Who?" I asked. He glanced at me. "Not who. What?" We stayed on that ledge for a while longer, the hum in the air settling into my bones. At some point I realized my breathing had matched its rhythm without my noticing. I forced myself to break the pattern, afraid of sinking too completely with something I didn't understand. Eventually Shepard stood, picked up his lamp and began walking again. "Where are we going now?" I asked. "Down," he said. I looked at the vast living floor beneath us. "Into that?" His smile was faint, almost reluctant. Not into. Through. There was no staircase, no carved steps, no rope, no convenient slope winding into the depths. The way down was a fissure, a split in the ledge barely wide enough for a person, angled sharply so that we had to turn sideways to enter. It dropped steeply, the walls close enough that the stone scraped my shoulders. Shepard went first, lamp held low. The glow lit his gloved hands as he found footholds in the narrow descent. I followed, the stone cold and damp beneath my palms. Almost immediately, the hum we'd been hearing above changed. Down here, it wasn't a distant vibration in the air. It was inside the walls, a living thrum, steady as a heartbeat, resonating through my bones. After what felt like 30 feet, the passage widened just enough for us to stand straight. That's when I noticed the walls weren't stone anymore. They were smooth, too smooth. The surface curved subtly inward, as if we were moving through the inside of a massive shell. The pale sheen caught the light in ways stone never could, and when I brushed my fingers along it, the texture wasn't hard but faintly yielding, like pressing on old leather. "She's older here," Shepard said without looking back. "She?" I echoed. "She," he repeated, voice low. "Down here she doesn't hide behind rock and mortar." Before I could ask what he meant, the passage bent sharply and opened into a vertical shaft. It wasn't straight, it spiraled. The spiral was perfect. Too perfect to be accidental, too precise to be the result of erosion. It wound downward like the thread of a screw, the inner wall sloping inward, the outer wall bulging outward, the floor a series of shallow ridges that formed a slow, deliberate descent. Looking down, I couldn't see the bottom. Looking up, the fissure we'd entered was already swallowed in shadow. "Shepard," I said quietly. "What's at the bottom?" His reply was simple. "Memory." Whoa. He began to walk. Every step sent a faint tremor through the walls, and I became aware, acutely aware, that the hum had shifted again. It was no longer a steady drone. There were pauses now, irregular but deliberate, like something was listening between beats. Once or twice I swore I heard an echo of our footsteps that didn't match our pace, as if something else was moving on the spiral below us. The deeper we went, the warmer the air became. Not humid, but dense, rich with a mineral tang that clung to my tongue. The light from Shepard's lamp revealed faint markings along the inner wall, shallow grooves that looped and tangled in no pattern I could understand. Some crossed over each other like scars. After several turns, we came to a place where the spiral widened into a platform. In the center of it lay a depression filled with something dark. It wasn't liquid, it was hair. Not in clumps, but a continuous woven mat of it, stretched taut like fabric. The strands varied in color and texture, black, blonde, gray, coarse, fine, and I had the sick realization that each strand must have once belonged to someone who had stood where I was standing now. Shepard walked to the edge and crouched. He didn't touch it, but he leaned close, head tilted as if listening. "She knows this place," he said. "Every step taken here leaves something behind." "What kind of something?" He looked at me then, and for a moment I thought he might actually answer. Instead he said, "Keep moving. She's waking faster than I expected." We descended again. The spiral tightened, the turns coming quicker, the walls closer. The hum had become a pulse, slow, deep, and unmistakably alive. My chest ached, not from exertion but from the oppressive pressure of the air. I kept catching myself matching the rhythm of my breath to that pulse, and each time I forced myself to break it, the air seemed to resist. At last, we reached the bottom. The spiral ended in a circular chamber with no visible ceiling. The walls curved seamlessly into the floor, which sloped toward a central opening about 6 feet across. From that opening came light, not steady. It pulsed in time with the hum, each flare illuminating the chamber with an amber glow before fading back to darkness. Shepard approached the edge and looked down. I joined him, careful to keep my weight back. The opening dropped into a space so deep I couldn't see the far side. The light came from somewhere below, refracted through layers of something translucent. And there, faint but unmistakable, shapes moved. Not clearly, not in a way my mind could fully accept. But the impression was there. Forms shifting slowly, coiling and uncoiling, pressing briefly against the translucent surface before sliding away. "She remembers you now," Shepard said. I swallowed. "Me? All of us," he corrected. "Anyone who comes this far. She keeps the shape of us long after we've gone." As he spoke, the hum shifted one last time. And this time, it wasn't just sound. It was in my chest, my throat, my teeth. And then I realized it wasn't a hum at all. It was a voice. It didn't speak in words I could understand, but the meaning slid into my mind all the same. It wanted to know. At first, I thought it was the air shifting, a faint stir, like the change in pressure before a storm, brushing against my cheek. Then it happened again, stronger, and I realized it wasn't air. Something was moving beneath the translucent surface at the center of the chamber. Not the slow, gliding shapes we'd glimpsed before, but something finer, thinner. Filaments. They pressed upward against the membrane, creating faint indentations that shifted as they probed for a point of weakness. Each time they touched, the amber glow flared slightly brighter, and the hum inside my skull deepened. "Shepherd," I started, but he raised a hand, silencing me without turning his gaze from the pit. The filaments began to align. Slowly, deliberately, they arranged themselves into a pattern. From where I stood, it looked like a series of loops intersecting at odd angles, twisting in a way that seemed to tug at my peripheral vision. It took me a moment to understand. They were forming the shape of a hand that reached upward. The glow intensified as it touched the inner curve of the opening, and for an instant, I swore I could feel its fingertips grazing my skin, even though I hadn't moved closer. Shepherd stepped back, breaking whatever was forming between us. The glow dimmed. "She's testing you," he said. "What happens if I let her?" He gave a dry, humorless chuckle. "You won't have to wonder for long." The hum in my head changed pitch, sharper now, impatient. The filaments drew back, but not far. They hovered, swaying faintly in the light, like grass waiting for a breeze. Shepherd walked the perimeter of the chamber, his boots leaving no mark on the smooth floor. He stopped opposite me, knelt, and pressed a gloved hand flat against the wall. The wall yielded. It sank inward beneath his palm, not crumbling, not cracking, but folding in on itself as though it had been weight. For his touch, the indentation widened until it formed a narrow recess, inside of which hung something impossible. It was a mask. Not a sculpted mask, not something crafted from metal or ceramic. This looked like it had been grown. Its surface was pale, fibrous, and faintly porous, with holes where the eyes and mouth should be. The edges were frayed, tapering into fine threads that drifted in the still air as though underwater. "She gave me this when I was young enough to think it was a gift," Shepherd said. "It's how she sees the world above, through the ones willing to wear her face." He didn't offer it to me. Instead, he held it in front of his own, pressing it gently into place. The change was immediate. The hum in my head became clear, sharpened into layers. Whispers stacked atop each other, hundreds of them, overlapping but distinct. They spoke in different voices, different tones, all carrying the same undercurrent of recognition. They knew me. Somewhere deep in that chorus, I thought I heard my own voice, faint and far away. Shepherd pulled the mask away, and the sound collapsed into the single low thrum again. "That's how she finds you later," he said. "If she likes what she hears, she'll call you back. If she doesn't—" He stopped, then glanced toward the fissure we'd entered from. "She'll send something else instead." I didn't want to ask what something else meant. The glow below flared again, brighter this time, as though impatient with the delay. The filaments writhed, twisting into new patterns, some of which looked almost like writing. If writing could pulse and shift before your eyes could fully make sense of it. "She's losing patience," Shepherd said. "We should leave before she decides to—" He didn't finish, because the first filament broke through. It happened silently. One moment it was pressing against the surface, the next it was through, extending into the chamber like a thread of living glass. It swayed, testing the air, then angled toward me with unmistakable intent. "Shepherd," I said, stepping back. "Don't let it touch you," he said calmly. "If she takes your measure, she'll never let you go." But there was something in the way the filament moved, not fast, not aggressive, that felt almost pleading, like it was asking, not taking. My foot hesitated mid-step. The filament paused, as though it could sense the decision forming in me. Then another broke through, and another. They spread out like a fan, swaying in unison. every movement timed perfectly with the throb of the hum. I realized then that the hum wasn't just a sound, it was a beat, and the filaments were dancing to it. Shepard's voice cut through my trance. You touch one, and you won't remember why you ever wanted to leave. The chamber was shrinking, not in any physical sense. The walls didn't move, the ceiling didn't lower, but the space between me and the filaments felt shorter with every heartbeat. Shepard's warning hung in the air, but the hum pressed against it, muffling it, turning his words into something distant and unimportant. The nearest filament bent toward me, the tip no thicker than a strand of hair. It moved without hesitation now, not cautious, not testing, certain. I took another step back and felt the cold wall press against my shoulder blades. She's choosing, Shepard said. His voice was steady, but I could see the shift in his posture. Weight slightly forward, right hand flexing inside the glove. And you don't want to know which way. I believed him. I also didn't. Because the hum wasn't just sound anymore. It was meaning. It was telling me that Shepard didn't understand the whole story. That his rules weren't the only rules. That whatever waited in the glow wasn't a predator. Not if you came willingly. The first filament hovered inches from my chest. I could see tiny barbs along its length, so fine they caught the light like frost. I thought of the spiral scars on Shepard's hand. He saw where I was looking. That's not a mark, he said. It's a promise. The word hit harder than I expected. The hum deepened, curling around the word, filling it with something warm and slow and inviting. She likes you, Shepard said. That's the danger. The filament tilted, almost like a nod, and closed the last bit of distance. Shepard moved. It wasn't a violent motion, no weapon drawn, no strike, but it was decisive. He stepped between us, placing himself directly in the filament's path. His gloved hand came up and caught it just below the tip. The reaction was instantaneous. The filament writhed, not in pain, but in a sudden surge of energy, wrapping around his hand and forearm in a spiral. The hum spiked, vibrating through my ribs, my teeth. Shepard didn't flinch. Go, he said. I didn't move. She's not for you, he said, still gripping the filament. You don't get to decide that. The filament tightened, the barbs cutting faint lines into the leather of his glove. The other filaments began to converge, drawn toward him, their movements synchronizing like the pull of a tide. The hum fractured. I realized with a start that I could hear two separate patterns now, one calling to me, one pulling at him. The glow below flared until the entire chamber was bathed in amber light. Shepard's head snapped toward the fissure we'd entered from. If you want to live, you walk out now. The word live landed heavy, as if it carried a definition I didn't yet know. I turned toward the fissure. The way back seemed longer than before, the darkness thicker. The hum behind me softened, not gone, just quieter. And in that softening came something worse than the pull, the certainty that if I left now, I'd never find this place again. Shepard, I said, what happens if I stay? He looked at me, and for the first time there was something like pity in his eyes. Then you find out what she keeps in the rooms, even I won't enter. The filament around his arm pulsed once, in perfect time with my heartbeat, and I understood, in some deep, wordless way, that this wasn't an ending. It was an invitation. The moment I agreed, then I didn't say the word, not out loud, just thought it. The hum shifted. It was no longer coming from below. It was inside me. The filaments loosened their hold on Shepard, coiling back toward the pit. They didn't retreat completely. They sank, curling into spirals that pulsed in slow rhythm, like something breathing in deep water. The glow dimmed until the chamber was lit only by faint traces of amber clinging to the walls. And then the wall behind me opened. Not like a door, not like anything built by human hands. It folded, peeling back in layers of shadow and faint light, revealing a passage that seemed to recede farther than the size of the building should allow. Shepard didn't move to follow. You've made your choice, he said quietly. From here, you walk without me. I hesitated in the threshold. The air was different inside, not stale but too fresh, almost sharp, like the first inhale after stepping out into cold night air. She'll give you wonders, Shepard said, but only in exchange for something you won't realize you've lost until it's gone. I almost asked him what that was, but the hum urged me forward, and my feet carried me into the passage. The floor wasn't solid, not in the way stone or wood is solid. It was firm, but with a subtle give under each step, as though I were walking across the back of something enormous and sleeping. The walls were not smooth. They pulsed faintly, like veins beneath skin. Threads of light ran through them, branching and reconnecting in patterns that almost resembled constellations. As I walked, I began to notice echoes, faint movements in the walls, as though someone were walking just beyond them, perfectly in sync with me. Sometimes the figure would lag slightly behind, sometimes pull just ahead, but always close enough to sense. I reached a bend in the corridor and turned and found myself staring at a doorway unlike any I'd ever seen. It wasn't an arch or a frame. It was a vertical wound, its edges raw and irregular, held open by what looked like strands of glassy cartilage. Beyond it, darkness. The hum swelled, filling my head with a wordless promise. Step through. I did. Inside was not darkness, but something worse. The room was bright, a searing white light that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. The floor was reflective, a perfect mirror, the ceiling too. And in that infinite reflection, I saw myself. And I saw her. She didn't have a face, not exactly. Her form was a shifting haze of filaments and light, constantly weaving and unweaving. But the suggestion of features was always just at the edge of becoming. I realized then that the reflection I was seeing wasn't copying my movements. It was moving slightly ahead of me, anticipating. When I blinked, it was already closing its eyes. When I lifted my hand, it was already lowering its arm. She was my reflection, and I was hers. The hum quieted, replaced by something worse, silence so deep it pressed against my eardrums. Then the figure leaned forward. The mirrored floor between us vanished, and we were face to face. If she could be said to have a face. Her filaments reached toward me, not to touch my skin, but to trace the outline of my shadow. The moment they did, I felt something leave me. Not pain, not fear. Something more fundamental, like the weight of a memory being lifted before you could remember what it was. The room pulsed once and I staggered back. The mirror was whole again. My reflection matched me perfectly now, but I knew it wasn't me anymore. The hum returned, gentle and almost kind, and in it I understood. The museum had taken my measure. At first, I couldn't tell what was missing. Everything felt intact. My thoughts, my limbs, my breath. But then the reflections shifted again, not just mine. The mirrored floor began to show other figures scattered across its surface like stars on water. They weren't standing in this room with me, yet I could see them here, moving through other corridors, climbing other stairs, peering into exhibits I'd never seen. Some were dressed in clothes decades out of fashion. Others wore styles I didn't recognize at all. All of them had one thing in common. When they passed near a reflective surface, their faces blurred, the way mine now blurred if I didn't focus hard enough. I realized then, the museum had taken my image, not just how I looked, but the imprint of me that the world recognized. A cold, quiet dread pooled in my stomach. If I stepped outside now, would anyone know me? Would my friends hesitate when I waved? Would my name feel wrong in their mouths, like they were trying to recall someone they'd met once but forgotten? "She took your anchor," a voice said behind me. I turned, and Shepard was there. He stood just outside the threshold, 1 foot in the corridor, 1 in the room. His face was shadowed, but I could see the tightness in his jaw. "That's what this place eats first," he continued. "The part of you that keeps you tethered to the rest of the world." I swallowed. "Why didn't you stop me?" His eyes narrowed. "Because you were already listening to her more than to me. If I'd dragged you out, you'd have found your way back anyway. At least now you know what you traded." The filaments in the mirrored figure stirred, tilting toward Shepard, and for the first time I saw him step back. "You've been here before," I said. His silence was answer enough. "You lost something," I pressed. He looked past me at the reflection that was no longer mine, and his voice was so low I almost didn't catch it. "She took my name." I stared at him. "But you just—" "That's not my name," he said sharply. "It's the one I use now, the one she hasn't learned yet." The mirrored figure reached toward him and the hum deepened. Shepard's hand twitched, like he wanted to draw something from his coat, but he didn't. "She wants you to follow," he said, his tone suddenly hard again. And if you do, you'll stop thinking of yourself as separate from her. That's when you vanish for good. The room pulsed once more, the white light flooding brighter, and I felt the pull again, not physical, but a deep insistence that I belonged here. She already took my anchor, I said. What else could she take? Shepard's gaze didn't waver. The part of you that notices you're missing. The hum swelled, and I understood. There were still rooms deeper than this. The hum was steady now, not loud, not overwhelming, just constant, like the background thrum of a living thing that had been here long before the museum existed. It didn't push or pull, it simply waited. I looked at Shepard. He wasn't looking at me. His eyes were fixed on the mirrored floor, on the other figures moving through other halls. Some of them flickered in and out as if they were walking in places the mirrors couldn't fully catch. She won't chase you, he said. She never does. That's the worst part. Why? He finally met my eyes, because the ones who go further always choose to. The reflection, my reflection that wasn't mine, tilted its head. The motion was subtle, almost curious, and then it stepped back. The mirrored floor rippled like disturbed water. Beneath it, I glimpsed something that wasn't reflection at all, another stairwell spiraling down into darkness. I couldn't see the bottom. I couldn't even be sure there was one. She's showing you the way, Shepard said. The same way she showed me. I swallowed. And you didn't take it? His jaw tightened. I did. Once. The hum grew warmer, softer, almost coaxing now. It didn't feel like a trap. It felt like an invitation. What's down there? I asked. Shepard's eyes darkened. If you come back, you won't come back as yourself. You'll bring her with you. I looked down at the mirrored floor again. The staircase below it seemed to be waiting for my foot. One step and the surface would break. But the thought that stopped me wasn't fear. It was the image of leaving, walking out of the museum, back into the city, back to a life where no one's gaze held recognition, where my name felt foreign even to me. The world outside suddenly felt less real than the pull beneath the mirror. Shepard, I said slowly, what happens if you go all the way down? He didn't speak for a long time. When he did, his voice was hoarse. You stop asking questions. The hum pulsed once. The staircase shimmered, its edges blurring, as if the choice was slipping away. I stood at the edge, my reflection's eyes locked on mine. No, her eyes, patient and knowing, waiting for me to decide whether to stay in a world that would forget me, or step into one that would never let me go. Behind me, Shepard whispered, choose fast. She hates hesitation. I lifted my foot, and in that instant, I knew one choice was the end of me, the other was the end of everything else. The mirror surface gave way.